Picking up from where I left off on video 56, I'm going to continue to create a measure which will take any filter applied on my month column, but it will ignore any filter applied on department in order to determine what the maximum of my y-axis should be. Because right now, when I select the B department, which has the lowest amount of sales, my y-axis is going to change, and I don't want that. I want a fixed y-axis which will change depending on month selected. And this was where I left off. I can now safely remove this part. My current table accurately summarizes my sales table based on month and department, so I have each unique combination, and I have my sum of sales for the given combination of month and department. I now want to find the maximum value, which, because I have a table, I have a convenient function maxx, which will loop through my table. I can say find my maximum sum, which is then going to be maxx because I'm looping over a table, and that table is then the previous step, added sales, and my expression is to go into the sum sales column. And this is going to be a scalar value, which means when I do this, I get an error because it isn't a valid table, which I can get around with using the table constructors, also known as curly brackets, which creates my one row, one column table with the maximum value, which we can confirm by simply going into the previous step. We know that this is accurate, being April, department A, which had the highest sales. I don't want my y-axis to go from 0 to 2140. I want it to be rounded up. And I specifically want to round up always, because if I round down to the nearest 500, then 2140 gets rounded down to 2000, which means the top of my graph wouldn't be visible. And I can account for that. I first want to show the wrong answer, which is to use the basic round functions, because this has the problem of only rounding to the nearest multiple of 10, and I don't want that. I want to round, in this case, to 2500. And the round function will say, return a number to a specified number of digits, where the number is going to be my max sum, and then the number of digits in this case is going to be -3 to round to the nearest 1000. So if I add that in, it will round to 2000. And like I said, I need to round up, and I don't want to round to 3000 in this case. I want to be 2500. And I can add that as a variable to say that what is the value I want to round to the nearest multiple of. And in this case, I want it to be 500. And you could make this a measure or even a what if parameter, so the user themselves could change it. I don't think that's necessary here, but it's something you could do. And likewise, I also have the option of using RoundUp, which does what I want. I always want to round up, but the RoundUp function has the same problem of rounding a number up by a number of digits. So if I say max sum again and say -3, it's going to round up to 3000. To my knowledge, I can't change this to make it 500 because this is simply number of digits. Because this is my calculated table, I'm going to leave these two in, but they won't be in the final measure, because I'm using this calculated table to visualize each step to make it easier to understand. And this was also how I catched my problem when I did this as a work task. It means I first want to round the nearest x, and then x is going to be this variable, where I'll use the mround function instead of round or round up, because this rounds to a multiple. Still want to round maximum, and this time it's going to be rounded multiple, my variable. And this way the user only has to change this value in order to change the final calculation. And then I need a parentheses. And like I said, this is going to round to the nearest, which means 2140 gets rounded down. 2000 is closer than 2500. And that's a problem. I need a way to check if this value that I get from round nearest x is smaller than my actual value. And if so, I need it to round up, which I can do with a basic if sentence, which is to say that if my max sum is greater than my round nearest x value, then I know that it rounded down, which I don't want it to do. Then I can say the printed value should be rounded nearest x. And then I want to add my rounded multiple, which means 2000 is less than 2140. So my value should be 2000 plus 500. And if this isn't the case, meaning that it rounded up correctly, then I want to print that value, which was round nearest x. It will now round up to 2500, which is what I want to happen. And because I've now confirmed that this is the accurate number, I can take my calculated table and turn it into a proper measure. And I can now delete all these intermediary steps that I no longer need. I can delete these rounded steps that I don't need. And I don't need the curly brackets because that's going to produce an error. And it's very annoying that it's adding all of these extra zeros because I need to go in and change my formatting. I do want that to be currency and I don't want any commas. Now that's 2500. which is correct given my months, and I can now test that if I select A, nothing happens. If I select B, nothing happens. But if I select months, this will change. That's exactly what I want, because it doesn't make sense that my y-axis would go up to 2500 when my highest value is 1200. I'd rather this be dynamic, which was the entire exercise. Which means I can now go into my visual under the formatting and say y-axis. I want that to be from 0, and the maximum should not be auto. It should instead be my measure, which was called max sale cross join, blah, blah, blah. And that's then accurate. And if I change to March and February, because my highest value is 1600, it will be rounded up to 2000. And if I select January and February, then the maximum will be 1500 because the maximum value is 1200. And just to show what would happen if I don't add this extra step here, where I do my always round up, my graph now looks a little funky. And luckily for me, I can actually see what's going on because I have this value below the maximum. But you might not have that, and then things would be wrong. And that's precisely why I wanted to do this roundup. I spoiled you a little. I think you can live with that. So, yep,